I wasn't supposed to be on that road that night. The meeting at school had been canceled last minute, and I decided to take the long way home, the one that passed through the quiet part of town. I was halfway through a song on the radio when I saw it, Daniel's car. His silver sedan, the one with the small dent near the backlight. It was parked outside a restaurant I didn't recognize, one of those cozy places with warm yellow lights and white tablecloths you only go to for something special. At first, I thought maybe he was there with a client. He often had work dinners, and I'd stopped asking questions about them months ago. But something inside me didn't feel right. I slowed down and pulled over across the street, my heart starting to beat in my throat. Through the large front window, I spotted him. Daniel, my husband of 8 years. He wasn't sitting alone. There was a woman with him, sitting close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She was smiling, leaning in as he spoke, her hand resting near his wine glass. And then he laughed. That laugh. The one I used to hear when he'd tell me some silly joke while cooking breakfast. I hadn't heard that laugh in months. I sat there frozen, my fingers gripping the steering wheel. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the car. I wanted to tell myself it was innocent. Maybe she really was a colleague. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. But when I saw him reach across the table and touch her hand, gently, in that familiar way he used to touch mine, something inside me cracked. It wasn't just the act, it was the tenderness in it. The ease. The comfort. He looked alive in a way he hadn't with me for a long time. And that realization hurt more than anything. My first thought was to go inside, to make a scene, to demand an explanation. But as I sat there, watching them sip wine and share a plate of pasta, anger slowly gave way to something colder. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I didn't want to be the crying wife standing in a restaurant full of strangers. So I stayed still. I memorized everything. The color of her dress, the way he smiled, the faint glimmer of a necklace around her neck. I watched until the waiter brought them dessert, until she laughed again, and he reached for her hand once more. Then I turned the car back on and drove away. The road home felt endless. Every streetlight blurred through my tears. I kept replaying that image in my mind, Daniel's face, the way he looked at her like she was something precious. By the time I reached our driveway, I'd stopped crying. Inside the house, everything looked the same. His jacket on the chair, his shoes by the door. But nothing was the same anymore. I stood there in the silence, feeling the kind of emptiness that only comes when something you trusted finally shatters. I knew deep down that the man I loved wasn't mine anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound of Daniel's car pulling into the driveway. When it finally did, I pretended to be asleep. He came in quietly, like he always did after his so-called late meetings. I heard the faint rustle of his jacket being hung up, the soft click of his phone as he set it on the nightstand. My heart was beating so hard I thought he'd hear it. When he slipped into bed beside me, I could smell the faint trace of a woman's perfume. Something floral, something that didn't belong to me. In the morning, I acted normal. I made coffee, packed my lunch for work, and smiled when he kissed my cheek. But inside, I felt hollow. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, that maybe what I saw wasn't what it looked like. Still, the image of that dinner, their hands touching, his soft smile, kept flashing in my mind. I needed to know the truth, even if it broke me. That afternoon, while folding laundry, I noticed his blazer hanging over the chair. He'd worn it the night before. I reached into the inside pocket, half expecting nothing. Instead, my fingers brushed against a small slip of paper. A dry cleaning ticket. I unfolded it and saw the date, 2 days before that dinner. Below it, a receipt tucked in behind it. My stomach tightened. It was from that same restaurant. The same one I saw him in, but from 3 weeks earlier. My hands shook as I stared at the numbers. Dinner for 2. A bottle of wine. Dessert. He'd been there before. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was something practiced. Something planned. That's when I noticed the photo I had taken the night before still on my phone. I opened it again and zoomed in. The woman had dark brown hair, soft curls falling just above her shoulders. She wore a light gray dress and a thin gold chain around her neck. My breath caught when I looked closer at the pendant. It was a small oval locket with a carved edge. I knew that piece. I'd given one just like it to Daniel's sister, Emily, 3 years ago for her birthday. It was a one-of-a-kind design from a small jeweler in town. There was no way 2 existed. So why was it around that woman's neck? My chest tightened with confusion and anger. He had given her something that carried meaning, something personal. It wasn't just an affair. It was intimate, thoughtful. That realization hurt worse than the sight of them together. I sat down on the edge of the bed, holding that receipt in my hand, feeling my throat burn. All the little things I'd ignored started lining up in my head. His new cologne, the late-night calls from clients. The way he'd turn his phone face down whenever I walked by. I remembered the times he'd brushed off my attempts to talk, saying he was tired or stressed. The truth had been right in front of me all along. I just didn't want to see it. But now, with that receipt in my hand and that photo staring back at me, I couldn't deny it anymore. Daniel was cheating. And this time, there was no room left for doubt. For days, I moved through the house like a ghost. Daniel still smiled at me in the mornings, still texted me during the day with short, polite messages. Nothing that hinted at the life he was hiding. Every time he kissed me goodbye, I felt my stomach twist. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. I wanted to know everything before I said a word. I started paying attention in ways I never had before. When he talked about work, I listened for names, for details he might slip. One evening at dinner, he mentioned a new client, someone named Hastings. He said it so casually, like it meant nothing. But the name stuck in my head. Later that night, while he was in the shower, I searched through his briefcase. I knew it was wrong, but my heart had already been torn open. What was one more sin? Inside one of his folders, I found an appointment card from a dental office. The name printed on it was Claire Hastings. My hands went cold. I didn't know the woman, but the name felt familiar. The next day at work, I asked a coworker, a local who knew everyone in town, if she'd heard of a Claire Hastings. She nodded right away. "Oh, sure," she said. "She's a dental hygienist at Dr. Lambert's clinic. Her parents own that small hardware store on Main Street. Nice family. Church folks." That detail hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't some stranger from far away. She lived right here in our small town. She probably walked the same streets I did, smiled at the same people. That made the betrayal feel even worse, like it had been hiding in plain sight. That night, I went through Daniel's things again. His jacket pockets, his wallet, the drawer where he kept his receipts. I found 2 more from that same restaurant, each one dated weeks apart. Every client dinner he'd mentioned matched one of those nights. I wrote down the dates in a small notebook, along with the times he'd been working late. The pattern was clear. Every 2 weeks, the same restaurant, the same story. The next time he said he was going to meet a client, I asked gently, "Is it the Hastings account again?" He looked up, surprised, then nodded. "Yeah, they're good people," he said easily, not realizing how the words cut through me. I forced a small smile and said nothing else. Each new piece of information made me feel less like a wife and more like an investigator. I noted what he wore on those nights, how long he was gone, how he smelled when he came home. I even started tracking his mileage when I borrowed his car. The numbers didn't lie. Some nights, I sat in bed staring at the notebook, my heart heavy but steady. The sadness that once felt unbearable started turning into something sharper, colder. I stopped crying. I stopped asking why. I already knew enough. Daniel had chosen her, and he had done it with care, with time, with lies. By the end of that week, I had everything written down. Every receipt, every excuse, every date he thought I wouldn't notice. The truth was no longer a mystery. It was a record neat and undeniable. And as I looked at the pages, I made myself a quiet promise. If he wanted to live in lies, I would make sure the truth found him, when he least expected it. It was almost midnight when I heard his car pull into the driveway. I didn't bother pretending to be asleep this time. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, listening to the sound of his key turning in the lock. Daniel walked in wearing that same gray suit he always wore for meetings. His tie was loose, his smile easy. "Hey," he said softly, surprised to see me awake. "You're still up?" I looked at him carefully. His hair was slightly messy, and when he leaned down to kiss my cheek, I caught the scent immediately, sweet, floral, familiar. It wasn't mine. It was hers. The same perfume that had clung to his clothes before. "How was dinner?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. He didn't hesitate. "Long," he said with a small sigh. "The team's planning a new client pitch. It ran late, and the restaurant service was slow." His tone was smooth, practiced. The words rolled off his tongue too easily, like he'd said them before. I nodded, pretending to believe him. "Must have been exhausting," I said quietly. He smiled, relieved that I hadn't pressed further, and walked upstairs to shower. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway, listening to the sound of running water. My hands trembled, but not from sadness anymore. From anger. From knowing that he thought I was still blind. When he came back down, freshly showered and comfortable, he kissed my forehead and said, "You worry too much, Lydia." I watched him walk away, and I realized something. He didn't even bother to hide the lie anymore. He thought he'd trained me to accept it. That hurt more than the cheating itself. That night, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling until morning light started to fill the room. My mind kept circling the same thought. How easily he'd lied, how calmly he'd played his part. Every fake excuse, every soft smile, every touch that once felt like love now felt like poison. When I finally got out of bed, I walked into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection didn't look like me anymore. The woman staring back had tired eyes, but there was something different in them, something colder, steadier. I'd spent weeks collecting the truth, writing it down, watching it unfold piece by piece. I'd waited for him to come clean, to show a flicker of guilt. He never did. As I brushed my hair, a strange calmness settled over me. The tears that used to come so easily were gone. I felt empty, but in that emptiness there was strength. I didn't want to beg him to stay or ask him why. I didn't want another fake apology. I wanted him to see what his lies looked like when they were stripped bare. By the time Daniel came downstairs for breakfast, I had already made my decision. I smiled at him like nothing was wrong. I handed him his coffee, listened to him talk about his busy day, and nodded in all the right places. But inside, I was already planning something else. If he wanted to keep having secret dinners, then I would give him one. A dinner he would never forget. On Wednesday morning, Daniel left his laptop open on the kitchen counter before heading to work. He was in a rush, juggling his phone and coffee like always. After the door closed, I stood there for a moment, staring at the glowing screen. I knew I shouldn't, but curiosity and anger had long replaced hesitation. I moved closer and looked at his calendar. My heart slowed when I saw the entry. Client dinner, 7:30 p.m. Friday. The same restaurant. The same lie. I didn't need to guess who he'd be meeting. My fingers tightened on the counter as I whispered the name in my head, Claire. For a long moment, I just stood there. Then something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to cry or scream or throw things. I was going to end this my way. Calmly. Clearly. Completely. I picked up my phone and searched for the restaurant's number. When the hostess answered, I softened my voice, pretending to be cheerful. "Hi, I'm just calling to confirm a reservation for Daniel Monroe, Friday evening. 2 people, 7:30, private table." There was a short pause, and then she said, "Yes, confirmed. We have that booking." My hand trembled, but I smiled through it. "Perfect, thank you." I hung up, took a breath, and called again a few minutes later. This time, I made a reservation under my own name, Lydia Monroe. For people, 7:45 p.m. I requested a table not far from Daniel's. Once that was done, I sat down with my phone and thought about who should sit beside me that night. My sister Rachel came to mind first. She was the only person who knew everything, the one who had held me while I cried and told me I deserved better. I texted her, "Dinner Friday? I need your help with something." She replied almost instantly, "I'll be there." The next part wasn't easy. I found the number for the Hastings family's hardware store. My palms were sweaty when I called, but I forced myself to stay calm. Martha answered. Her voice was kind, polite. I introduced myself carefully. "Hi, Mrs. Hastings, my name is Lydia Monroe. I believe you know my husband, Daniel. I'd love to meet with you and your husband Friday evening at the Willow Creek restaurant. There's something important I need to discuss with you both. It concerns your daughter." There was a pause, confusion in her tone. "Our daughter? Is everything all right?" I smiled even though my stomach was in knots. "It will make more sense when we meet. I promise." She hesitated, then agreed. "All right, we'll be there." When I hung up, I sat in silence for a while. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. What I was planning wasn't loud or violent. It was simple. A quiet dinner where the truth would finally sit at the same table as the lies. That night, when Daniel came home and smiled like nothing was wrong, I smiled back. He had no idea what was waiting for him on Friday. I kept my voice calm, my movement steady, but inside, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Friday evening came faster than I expected. The whole day felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. I spent most of the afternoon pacing around the bedroom, staring at my open closet, unsure what to wear. My eyes landed on a deep blue dress I hadn't worn in years. The one Daniel used to say brought out my eyes. I slipped it on and stood in front of the mirror. It fit the same, but I wasn't the same woman who had once worn it to make him proud. I did my hair neatly and kept my makeup soft. Nothing too bold, nothing that would give away the storm brewing inside me. When I looked at my reflection, I saw calmness on the surface, but I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I took one last deep breath before leaving the house. The restaurant glowed with warm lights when I arrived. The same one I had seen through the window that night. Only this time, I was walking in with my head high. The hostess greeted me politely and led me to a table for 4, not far from the one I knew Daniel had reserved. The tablecloths were crisp white. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and wine. A few minutes later, Martha and Henry Hastings arrived. They looked kind, well-dressed, the sort of people you instantly respected. Martha wore a pearl necklace and a look of quiet curiosity, while Henry offered a polite smile as they approached. "Mrs. Monroe?" Martha asked softly as they reached the table. "Yes," I said, standing to shake their hands. "Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it." They sat down, exchanging a quick glance between them. Henry leaned slightly forward. "You mentioned something about our daughter?" "Yes," I said carefully. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I promise I'll explain everything soon. I just thought it would be better to do this in person." They both nodded, though confusion lingered on their faces. The waitress came to take our drink orders, and I asked for water, trying to calm the tremor in my hands. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I checked my watch. 7:29 p.m. Right on time. The door opened, and I didn't need to look up to know it was him. I could recognize his voice anywhere. Daniel's laughter drifted across the restaurant, warm and familiar, but not for me this time. He walked in with Claire beside him, her hand tucked easily into his arm. She looked exactly as I remembered, brown curls, gentle smile, wearing the same necklace that had once belonged to my sister-in-law. They followed the hostess toward their table, still smiling, completely unaware. I kept my face neutral, my eyes steady. The Hastings couple noticed them but didn't react yet. It hadn't clicked. Not yet. Daniel and Claire sat down 3 tables away, close enough for me to see every expression on their faces. They were comfortable together, their heads bent close as they spoke. Watching them felt like standing at the edge of something deep and dark, but I didn't look away. I folded my napkin slowly, hiding how hard my hands were shaking. I wasn't there to cause a scene. I was there to let the truth reveal itself. And now, with everyone finally under the same roof, the moment was only beginning. The waitress brought our drinks, and I barely touched mine. My hands rested on my lap, fingers locked together so no one would see them trembling. Martha and Henry chatted quietly, still unsure why they were there, though I could feel their uneasiness growing with every passing minute. My sister Rachel sat beside me, her hand lightly brushing mine under the table. She didn't have to say a word. She knew this was the moment everything would change. From where I sat, I could see Daniel and Claire clearly. They were laughing again, his hand resting casually on hers. He leaned in close, whispering something that made her giggle. Watching them didn't hurt like before. It just felt empty. Like I was observing strangers in a movie I no longer belonged to. When the waitress set their drinks down, I took a slow, deep breath. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, but my face stayed calm. I looked at the hostess, caught her eye, and gave a small nod. She smiled politely and came over. "Would you like to move to another table, Mrs. Monroe?" she asked. "Yes, please," I said softly. "We'd like to join some friends over there." The Hastings couple looked confused, but followed my lead as we all stood. Rachel rose beside me, her eyes fixed on Daniel's table. My heels clicked softly against the floor as I walked, each step slow, deliberate. The short distance between the tables felt like miles. Daniel didn't see me right away. He was mid-sentence when I stopped beside him. Claire noticed first. Her smile faltered. Then her eyes widened, the color draining from her face. Daniel followed her gaze, and when he saw me, he froze. The look on his face was almost disbelief, like his carefully built world had just cracked open in front of him. "Lydia?" he stammered, his voice breaking slightly. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I turned slightly so the Hastings couple could see the young woman sitting beside their daughter. I watched as realization spread across their faces, first confusion, then shock, then quiet horror. "Claire," Martha whispered, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" No one answered. The restaurant had gone almost silent now. Only the faint sound of clinking glasses came from another corner. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone and slid a printed photo onto the table, the one I had taken weeks ago. Daniel and Claire, sitting in that same restaurant, holding hands. I looked at Daniel, then at Claire, and said evenly, I thought it might be nice for everyone to have dinner together. After all, family should meet family, don't you think? Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came out. Claire's eyes filled with tears, her hands shaking as she pushed her chair back slightly. Martha covered her mouth, staring at her daughter like she couldn't recognize her. Henry sat stiff, jaw tight, saying nothing. The air around us felt thick, heavy with shame and disbelief. Daniel tried to speak, to explain, but his voice was thin. Lydia, this isn't. I cut him off quietly. Don't. Not here. Not again. No one moved for several seconds. Every face in the restaurant seemed turned toward us, but I didn't care. I'd spent months living with lies. Now, for the first time, the truth was sitting right in front of everyone who needed to see it. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply stood there, steady and calm, letting the silence do what my words never could. For a long moment, no one said anything. The silence hung thick around the table, heavy and suffocating. Claire's eyes darted from her parents to Daniel, then back to me. Her lips trembled, and suddenly she broke, tears spilling down her cheeks as she covered her face with her hands. The sound of her crying filled the space that Daniel's excuses hadn't yet reached. Martha looked heartbroken, staring at her daughter like she didn't know her. Claire, she whispered, her voice cracking. Tell me this isn't true. Henry's expression hardened. He turned toward Daniel, his voice low but sharp. How long has this been going on? Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. His eyes darted between us all, desperate to find a safe place to land. Finally, he managed to speak, his tone shaky. It's not what it looks like. Lydia misunderstood. Things have been hard between us lately, and Don't, I said quietly. My voice was calm, but my chest was tight. Don't lie again. Not here. He looked at me, startled, like he hadn't expected me to sound so steady. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small folder I had prepared. I placed it on the table, right beside their untouched glasses of wine. Slowly, I spread out the pieces one by one, restaurant receipts, copies of his work calendar, the dry cleaning ticket with the faint lipstick mark still visible. I looked him straight in the eye. You made me feel crazy, I said softly, my voice steady. Every time I asked a question, you made me believe I was overreacting. But truth doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs to be seen. Daniel's face went pale. Claire's sobs grew louder, and her mother turned away, pressing a hand to her chest. Henry stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He looked down at Daniel with pure disappointment. You should be ashamed, he said firmly. Then he turned to his daughter. We're leaving. Martha followed him, shaking her head, tears running silently down her face. I raised you better than this, she whispered to Claire before walking away. Claire tried to call after them, her voice breaking, but they didn't look back. Daniel reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her face blotched and wet. The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Every conversation had stopped. Every eye was on us. Daniel finally looked back at me, his voice small. Lydia, please, let's talk about this privately. I stood up slowly, collecting my bag, keeping my tone calm and clear. No, I said. You can finish your dinner with whoever's still hungry. He blinked, unsure what to say. I stepped back, giving him one last look, long enough for him to understand this was the end. Then I turned and walked out. My heels clicked softly against the floor, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel weak or lost. Behind me, I heard Claire crying and Daniel's voice breaking into excuses no one wanted to hear. But I didn't turn around. The truth had finally spoken for itself, and that was enough. I drove home with the windows down even though the night was cold. The air stung my face, but I didn't mind. It helped me breathe. My hands were tight around the steering wheel, my eyes blurry with tears that wouldn't stop. But this time, the tears weren't just from pain. There was something else mixed in, relief. The kind that comes when you stop pretending everything is fine. The road was quiet, and for the first time in months, so was my mind. I replayed the dinner in flashes, Claire crying, Daniel's pale face, her parents walking out without looking back. It had all happened so fast, but every detail was clear. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't broken down, and that small bit of control felt like strength. When I got home, the house looked the same as it always had. His shoes by the door, his jacket hanging on the chair, everything in its place. But I saw it differently now. It wasn't our home anymore. It was just a space filled with memories that no longer belonged to me. I sat on the couch, finally letting myself sob until there was nothing left. By the time I stopped, the clock showed almost 2 in the morning. I wiped my face, stood up, and started gathering his things. I worked in silence. Drawer by drawer, closet by closet, I packed his shirts, his ties, his shoes. Every item went into a box neatly, almost carefully. It wasn't anger driving me, it was finality. By sunrise, the living room was filled with boxes labeled with his name. The next morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee when I heard the sound of his car outside. He walked in like a man who didn't know what to say. His eyes were red, and he looked like he hadn't slept. "Lydia, please," he started, his voice rough. "Just give me a chance to explain." I didn't look up. "There's nothing to explain," I said quietly. "It's all already done." He glanced around the room, noticing the boxes. His face crumbled. "You called a lawyer?" I nodded once. "Yesterday afternoon," I said. "Before dinner." He stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch me, but I moved away. "You should go," I told him, keeping my voice steady. "Your things are ready." For a moment, I saw the man I used to love, the one who made me laugh and danced with me in the kitchen late at night. But that man was gone, buried under months of lies. Daniel didn't say another word. He picked up one of the boxes, then paused like he wanted to argue. But instead, he just nodded and left. 3 days later, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Martha Hastings. Her voice was soft, full of shame. "I'm so sorry for everything, Lydia," she said. "Claire's moved away for a while. She needs to get herself together." I thanked her, not out of bitterness, but out of closure. After I hung up, I sat by the window, watching the trees sway outside. My heart still ached, but it was quieter now. The truth had cost me my marriage, but it had also given me something back, my peace. Healing didn't come right away. Some mornings still hurt, and some nights felt too quiet. But every time I looked around and saw that the house was finally mine again, I remembered that dignity feels better than revenge ever could. The weeks that followed passed slowly, but they were quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't feel heavy anymore. I started to fill my days with simple things. Long walks, coffee in the morning sun, evenings spent reading by the window. The house felt different without Daniel, lighter somehow. There were moments when the silence still hurt, but I didn't fight it. I let it stay until it softened. I began writing again. At first, just a few lines here and there. But one night, I opened my old journal and started to write everything I had been holding inside. I wrote about the pain, the betrayal, and the long nights where I'd felt like I was disappearing inside my own home. Then I wrote about that dinner, the calmness, the fear, and the strange power that came when I finally stopped begging to be believed. Writing it down helped me see things clearly. I realized I didn't hate Daniel. I didn't even really think about him much anymore. Hate would have kept me tied to him, and I didn't want that. What I felt instead was pity. He had traded something real for something that never would have lasted. He had broken the one person who stood by him. And for what? A secret that turned into shame. Sometimes I wondered if he thought about that night, about the look on my face when I laid the truth out in front of him. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But I knew one thing for sure. He could never twist the story again. I had shown everyone what he truly was, without screaming, without breaking down. Just the truth, standing quietly in the open. One afternoon, a few months later, I found myself driving through the same part of town where it had all started. Without meaning to, I slowed down as I passed the restaurant. The sign was still the same warm lights glowing through the windows. Couples sat at tables, laughing and holding hands, the way Daniel and I once did. For a moment, I thought the sight might sting, but it didn't. Instead, I parked across the street and just looked at it. That place had once been where my heart cracked open. Now it was just a building, nothing more. I smiled faintly, not because I felt proud or victorious, but because I finally felt free. I wasn't the broken woman sitting in the car that night anymore. I was someone new, someone who had walked through the worst and come out steady on the other side. Before I drove away, I whispered to myself, the truth doesn't need an audience. It just needs the courage to be seen. The wind outside carried the words away, and I let it. I didn't need anyone else to know what I had overcome. The strength wasn't in exposing him. It was in choosing myself afterward. As I pulled back onto the road, the weight that had followed me for months felt lighter, like it had finally let go.